Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do an if you like this try that, specifically for if you like FRIEREN Beyond Journey's End, then you might like some of these other recommendations from today. I am going to be including stories from a variety of different mediums, so we will be talking about some video games, other manga, anime, just a whole collection of things so that no matter what kind of stories you tend to gravitate towards, there will hopefully be something for you. And before I jump into my recommendations, feel free to leave yours as well, not just for the people who come to this video, but selfishly because I kind of want to see as well. As always, whenever I do a like this, try that, or any kind of recommendations video, I don't want any of you to worry about duplicating what I end up recommending. I actually think that's a good thing, as it tells people who come to this video, if myself and a lot of you are recommending the same thing, then that should be a pretty good option. Jumping into it though, I'm going to start with a story that I actually mentioned in my final thoughts for season 1 video, and I figured that would be a good way to kick it off. This is like a much darker, bleak version of a lot of the themes within FRIEREN, and that would be the Sword Defiant. Within this story, you are looking at somebody who was a part of the party, the ensemble cast, who helped vanquish this great evil. And now that that is over, you are looking at the effects of what that journey had on this particular individual. In FRIEREN, of course, you are seeing that FRIEREN's a character that lives for an extraordinarily long amount of time. So a lot of the aspects of the after for her is learning what she actually loses by not embracing life and the people within it and the opportunities and the little things. And within this story, it is a lot darker in that it's exploring the sense of loneliness that comes when everybody views you as the hero, but nobody really views you as a person any longer. And the sadness of you and your other party members have gone their separate ways. You're now living very different lives, if you're even all still alive at all. And the mourning that comes with that, and just in general, the depression of no longer feeling like you have a purpose. So if you are interested in another story that explores the after, but does so in a very gritty way, the Sword Defiant is absolutely going to fit that for you. I also, because I just gave my first recommendation based off of my final thoughts for season 1 of FRIEREN, I now want to recommend a couple of things that were in my first impressions of FRIEREN that I definitely feel I continue to have as a thought in my mind for an if you like this, try that as I progressed. And that would be Avatar: The Last Airbender and Tales of Arise. I specifically stated that I feel like if you combined Tales and Avatar, you would have this blend that would result in FRIEREN, and that is because if you take aspects of FRIEREN and you pull them apart, I do feel like in a lot of ways you get these stories. So Avatar: The Last Airbender I know is very well loved, and most of you are not like me and didn't discover Avatar: The Last Airbender for the first time in your life this year, so you've already watched it, but maybe you can have a rewatch if you're looking for something that scratches that itch and you just want something until the next season of FRIEREN is out. Maybe you're trying not to pick up the manga. So Avatar, I think, already utilizes a few things similar to FRIEREN. For one, it is more episodic. It's less arc-oriented, although there is a theme that is pushing everything forward, or there's some kind of motivation and greater plot. That's true for both of them. Despite that, for the most part, there are actually really compelling, interesting stories that develop the characters exceptionally within those short episodes. FRIEREN, I noted, I actually feel often utilizes pieces of episodes to do the same thing. It has more of a short story format up until the exam arc, I would say. Avatar, so many of the episodes are really, it's taking the time to explore this little village that they go to, or the characters aren't getting along, and how do they persevere and push past that? How do they really start to embrace who they are and what makes them strong or what makes them unique, and then also finding friends along the way. And there's just so many aspects of that that I think are present within FRIEREN. I also think that tone-wise, while Avatar is a little bit younger, of course, I do feel like FRIEREN is the kind of story that is young in tone, meaning that a lot of young people can watch it and really enjoy it. A lot of young kids can watch it and enjoy it and definitely have really valuable things pulled from it. But adults can watch it and have that same experience. And I think that's a very rare thing to accomplish. And I think FRIEREN and Avatar: The Last Airbender both do that exceptionally. Now, Tales of Arise is basically like if you made FRIEREN into a video game. It's just a Tales game. I mean, I think that's fairly true for a fair amount of RPGs, because FRIEREN is very much a love letter to the fantasy fan. If you have grown up playing a lot of RPGs, then FRIEREN is going to feel exceptionally familiar to you and like coming home in a lot of ways. And I think so many of the mechanics of the Tales games fit, where if you made FRIEREN into a video game, you could follow almost to a T how the Tales games play out. So a very great example is, I think that FRIEREN often wants to take the time to have day-to-day activities shown to you and recognize that a lot of the changes in life and in us as people, a lot of that happens in the little moments. And so those little moments that build, that not only change us, but they have relationships grow. And in Tales, there's actually an aspect of the game where when you sit down at the end of the day, you can then go and talk to your party members to get to know them better, and it kind of like builds the relationship with them. And then you, obviously, as the person playing the game, also get to know the characters more through these interactions. So there's already that aspect of them. There's also, of course, the feeling of different characters. This is a very true statement for a lot of RPGs, but the characters are fulfilling different roles. You usually have that mage character, somebody who's more of an expert in magic in some fashion. You often have the warrior character. You have a character that's the fast one, the character that's tremendously strong but a little bit slower, and you just have these character types that I think FRIEREN is not hiding the fact that it's building itself upon. And they fish. They fish in both of those. It's kind of a staple of an RPG, and I know it's hyper specific to state that, but I just want to highlight that if you are a fan of video games, then maybe check out Tales if you're looking for something like FRIEREN. I just need FRIEREN to be a video game. I really need it to be a video game at this point. I think it would be so fun. I think the art style would translate well to a game, and that's the other part of Tales that reminds me of FRIEREN, and FRIEREN reminds me of Tales, is that the art style is more so that sort of classic thing you think of. While it's, of course, a generalization, not all anime and manga looks like that, but there is a certain way that people envision anime art, and I think that both of them capture that. Branching out into some other recommendations, the next one is one that I've never seen anybody make this connection. I don't want to act as though nobody ever has. I've just not seen it, but I was reminded so much of this particular sci-fi series when watching FRIEREN, and that would be the Murderbot Diaries. I'm sure if you're a book fan, you've heard of Murderbot, but if not, I already think that the fact that so much of Murderbot's story is actually novellas rather than full-length novels, that in and of itself has a formatting aspect that is tied to FRIEREN. But also, Murderbot is about this death machine, basically, that in a sense is discovering what it means to be themselves. And when they have been programmed a certain way, but they also have the ability to have their own thoughts and opinions separate from their programming, then how do they learn who they really are and what they want and who they want to associate with and why? And so you're kind of just discovering alongside them what it means to exist. And I think so much of FRIEREN's story kind of matches that. And on top of that, FRIEREN has this feeling of, even when she is developing more understanding or empathy and she's really trying, sometimes there is still the feeling of maybe she didn't get it, quote unquote, exactly right. Maybe she didn't do everything in a conventional way, but it's the effort that she's making that is so meaningful, both to watch and then also for the other characters around her. And I feel like to some degree that's kind of similar of Murderbot. They don't always go about things as others would. Of course, in not being a literal human being, similar to how FRIEREN is an elf, not a literal human being, they already have things that make them different, but that doesn't make them less than or better. It just makes them different in some way, and our differences are part of what make us all so unique and wonderful. And I feel like there is that theme in both of them, and it's very beautiful in both of them as well. Touching on some additional fantasy manga, if that is what you're primarily looking for, then I would recommend Ancient Magus' Bride and Witch Hat Atelier. I'm not gonna lie, Witch Hat to me is above FRIEREN, but they're quite different. So I just want to be clear, FRIEREN very much has this journey sort of progression. You are following the characters and their experiences as they are going from one place to the next. That's not really how the fantasy setting is established within Witch Hat Atelier. They do occasionally go to different places, but the fantasy elements are more magic oriented, and there being these spells that they're learning. The setup for Witch Hat Atelier is that you have this young girl named Coco who has always been fascinated by magic, but within their world, as far as she knows, you have to be born with the ability to use magic. And then her understanding of magic is flipped on its head, and she has the opportunity to learn more about it through the mentorship of somebody who he himself is a witch. He brings her along to his atelier, which is what they call the areas where they have their mentees and their teaching students, and you're kind of following Coco and other characters throughout that. When it first starts, it feels like it's going to be so cozy and it's going to be so cute and charming and whimsical, and absolutely the art style captures that. I've done a whole review of, non-spoiler, why you should check out Witch Hat Atelier, which you should because it's incredible. It's so good. But the point is, it starts out seeming like it's going to be light and cute, but so much of the story as it progresses is really critical of society and institutions. It also talks about the ways in which the way that our society currently functions, and you could say the way their society currently functions, but you can pull things from it and apply it to real world situations, how it leaves certain people behind, and if it's right just because that's how it's always been. And when there are people that fight against that and push against what has always been, just because they cause harm along the way, are they actually fighting for something that is good? And if something is always done a certain way and it also is causing harm, just because it's done a certain way does not mean that it should be removed from criticism or even be removed from some kind of rebellion against it. And it actually starts to have really complex themes while always kind of having that sense of charm and whimsy, because a lot of the story is with children. I do think something that makes this exceptional is that you do have a full range. You have these young protagonists as well as having their mentors and adults in the picture. So you kind of see the full scope of how society can impact people and affect them differently depending on their age and their level of vulnerability and things like that. And it gets to be quite touching and quite emotional. But if you're looking for another beautiful, stunning fantasy manga series that involves very much learning spells, then I think that Witch Hat Atelier is definitely a good one to check out. As far as Ancient Magus' Bride, this one, from what I understand, I believe that the anime perhaps ups the feeling of there being like romance between the characters, and in the manga, I didn't really feel that as strongly. Instead, I felt like the characters had a very strong connection to each other, but I can't really state whether I think it was done well or not in the anime, but I would recommend the manga. It definitely, once again, similar to some of the other things on this list, utilizes that short form of storytelling because you have so many instances that feel like you're being told a short story and you're building and building and building towards a greater theme, and the themes in these two match very well. So the main character is somebody who comes across like she has no personality or wants or desires of her own. She almost doesn't even feel like she's alive because she just sort of exists and goes where she's told and does what she's told. And then you have another character who is a creature, and they don't quite understand the mannerisms of people, why people react the way they do, why they behave the way they do, but they're kind of trying to understand. And to me, the two protagonists in that story feel like if you took aspects of FRIEREN's personality and you split it into two characters, because one of them is separate from humans, but they're trying to understand. As a result of being different from humans, they can't ever really experience life in the same way, but they still want to understand a little bit better and understand emotions better. The other character is somebody who is trying to live life a little bit more, you could say, or understand why life is worth living. I think that FRIEREN is less sad in that sense because the main character in this story in a lot of ways doesn't really want to live, and so she is discovering reasons why she wants to live and being more caring of herself and who she is. And in that sense, I think that this story is a little bit more depressing to read, but I do feel like there are a lot of similarities between these characters, and FRIEREN is 100% utilizing so many features of fantasy, like classic defining tropes of fantasy, and I would say Ancient Magus' Bride does that same exact thing, because any little thing you can think of, any form of magic, any magical being you can think of is probably going to be present within this story. Really quick, I wanted to go through a number of stories that I feel like just have this coziness to them that FRIEREN also accomplishes really well. And I won't go as in depth with these, as I don't necessarily think thematically they match incredibly, or that their settings are necessarily a one-to-one. But I do think that if you're just looking for that feeling of coziness, that these are going to potentially have that for you. So one of them would be Legends and Lattes. This is kind of a staple in cozy fantasy at this point, but I specifically want to mention this one because it's sword and sorcery cozy fantasy. And in having something that feels like it's building off a foundation, a similar foundation to FRIEREN, I think that is part of why that cozy factor is still going to not just be like cozy to be cozy, but rather it's something that matches FRIEREN quite well in its setting. I also think the Spellshop can fit really well, as the main character is somebody who has a lot of anxiety, not quite the same as FRIEREN, but I do think that she is trying to put herself out there a little bit more and have this sense of found family and community building. And in that sense, I think there's a lot of similarities between FRIEREN and her, not their personalities, but the way in which they are trying to change their life for, in their opinions, the better. We also have Encyclopedia of Fairies. I actually feel like the way Encyclopedia of Fairies has our main character looking to gain more information because she is writing an encyclopedia. I just feel like there's some parallels between FRIEREN always craving more knowledge, and she even has a line about sometimes it's just about the seeking of that knowledge, and that's part of what she enjoys. On top of that, the way that the Fae are written in an Encyclopedia of Fairies kind of reminds me of some of the smaller monsters that FRIEREN and her party encounter as they progress through their journey. And the way that it's something that, like, you go to this area and the villagers will tell you there's something over here and you have to be wary of that. I think the way that they encounter monsters and the monsters themselves often feel rather similar. And there's an element of party building a little bit to Encyclopedia of Fairies. You want just true, I want to sit down and I want to watch a movie that just gives me all the cozy feelings in the world. Obviously, there is a certain studio that a lot of people point to as having the most whimsical, charming, cozy stories. They also have really depressing stories as well. But things like Kiki's Delivery Service, I think that has that sense of whimsy and also a sense of melancholy as well that's present within it. A part of me wants to recommend Howl's Moving Castle, and I'm like, is it really that similar? Maybe, maybe not, but it's great, and it's such a good cozy story as well with actual stakes. Beautiful animation. It is absolutely stunning. And then if you just want, literally you don't care about the magic, you just want that sense of cozy and cute, that's all you care about. Whisper of the Heart is one of the most adorable movies I have ever watched. Just watching like young people not quite know how to like talk to each other. It kind of a little bit reminds me of Fern and Stark, just a tiny bit, because the characters in this story irritate each other, but then they clearly like kind of have crushes on each other and they're just kind of trying to live life, and it's so darling and it's so cute. It's funny because when we watched that movie, my husband the whole time was like, this is the cutest movie I've ever seen. And so both of us, that's a recommendation from Sean as well, would tell you Whisper of the Heart. Again, no magic, it's contemporary, just want to make that clear. But if you're looking for cute factor, you just want cute, cozy, I need to be in a good mood, I just want to see a cute animated show, Whisper of the Heart is adorable. The last two recommendations have to do with some of our villains within FRIEREN, and this is also pulling from a conversation that I feel turned out to be very interesting that I had with a lot of you about the demons themselves in FRIEREN. So the recommendations are somewhat rooted in this. One of them would be the Shadow of the Fox trilogy. This is very much Japanese lore inspired, so a lot of the monsters are going to be things from Japanese lore, and I think that the progression of the story is in many ways already feeling like an anime. It is a book series, not a manga series, but I wish there was a visual medium for this story. I actually wish there was an anime for it because I think it would translate so well. In the first book especially, it feels incredibly episodic, and when they go from one place to the next, there will be these really devastating stories that you get within a short amount of time there isn't necessarily always right or wrong answers, and our characters are just trying to do their best. But the monsters in this, in a lot of ways, remind me of the demons within FRIEREN. And then also there is this sense of building your party as you progress, and you have your main characters, but then you have side characters as well. And the journey element is another thing, because a lot of the recommendations, while the themes have been similar, we haven't tapped into too many that have that journey feeling, and Shadow of the Fox is going to fit that. And then last for today, one of my favorite series of all time, it's a sci-fantasy series, would be the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. And the reason I'm recommending this one, and I will say, in the first book, you're not probably going to get much when it comes to the parallels between FRIEREN and Winnowing Flame. But if you read the entirety of the trilogy, I promise that those things will come into play a little bit more, and they have to do with the antagonists. The reason you're not going to see that so much in the first book is so much of the first book is a mystery. You don't really know who the antagonists are or why they're a threat. It does mean that this recommendation is a little hard to talk about because I don't want to spoil anything for you, but part of the conversation that I really enjoyed with the demons for FRIEREN is that a lot of times you have really compelling characters that you understand their motivations, but they are in some fashion in opposition to your main characters. The demons in FRIEREN are a little different in that they are more so operating from a certain instinct almost, in a way that a lot of you described as feeling more so like animalistic, where they don't really know anything different. Their concept of right and wrong isn't the same concept that humans would say is right and wrong, and thus they don't really feel evil in the same way as the mustache-twirling villain that just wants to destroy the world. And I think that while I don't disagree that that's how these villains felt in FRIEREN, I think part of why maybe I wasn't as taken aback by this way of writing this sort of character is because Winnowing Flame has it written so well. And again, I can't say too much else, but if you loved the portrayal of what makes them good, what makes them bad, are they actually evil, or are they just sort of coexisting in a way where they're not actually coexisting, they're existing, and they can't seem to coexist because they're just at odds with mankind. If you like that element, I would say Winnowing Flame is going to fit it. Winnowing Flame also has kind of that party building aspect to it, but it is adult fantasy, so just know going in, it's very complex world building. There's so much that you're in the dark about for so long, and it is very... It's not dense in its writing whatsoever, and the characters are very engaging. There's just a lot to try to take in, and you're constantly kind of kept on your toes. A little bit different in that way, but I do think that if you like the demons in FRIEREN, there's a good chance that you'll like the antagonists in this trilogy. But that's it for some recommendations for if you like FRIEREN Beyond Journey's End, you might like these. I will have them all in the description bar in case you thought something, it piqued your interest, but you didn't get the chance to write it down or anything like that. It'll all be in the description bar for you, so you can easily access that information again. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.